Hey, David Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay, and this is Coloring Chords. And I've had a lot of requests from viewers for more lessons centering around being creative and writing music and kind of mutating music and making variations and stuff like that. I've also had requests from viewers asking for some of my music and breaking down, some things that I've worked on or wrote. And I thought about it and I thought, you know what, let's try to put it together. And I had trouble figuring out what to call this lesson, so I just called it Coloring Chords because we're going to look at some very colorful chords, chord progressions, and really just kind of getting our hands dirty with music. And here's an image with a dozen guitarists that directly influenced me, and I was really inspired by their chord work and their chord vocabulary. Here's an image with 8 tips to help you write creative guitar parts and music. And the first tip is very important. You should turn off and eliminate all distractions. Put your phone away, turn the TV off. If you have a door to your studio, close the door, because you really need to focus and concentrate on what you're doing, because you're not learning music from someone else. You're pulling music out of yourself, and that's very difficult. And then the other 7 tips are definitely very handy and helpful for writing music and being creative and playful and using your imagination and stuff like that. So definitely pause the screen and really take heed of these tips right here. They're going to definitely help. And like I said earlier, I have had a lot of requests from viewers asking for some of my music or some of my licks and some of my ideas. And I have sprinkled a lot of my own ideas and music and riffs and licks and stuff into the lessons over the years. It's been a while. And we've obviously focused a lot on other people's music, famous bands and guitarists and songs and licks and solos and stuff like that. But I can't really tell you, what Steve Vai was thinking when he wrote a song, or David Gilmour or Van Halen or Steve Morse or whoever, because that's kind of a real personal thing, like whatever they were thinking and what led them to create or write, certain things. So I can't really jump in their heads, but I can definitely share what I was thinking, when I was writing some of this music of my own. And that's kind of why I decided to do it this way, because you can read magazine interviews and stuff like that and get some insight as far as maybe where a song came from or the spark of inspiration. But I'm just going to be sharing things that I personally kind of tackled and broke through, in my own music. So if this sounds interesting, buckle up, because here we go. So for me personally, sometimes I become very inspired just hearing one single static chord. Sometimes that's all it takes, and my creative juices start flowing, and it's like, ooh, I think I hear something in my head, or I think I want to, borrow that and start, kind of fleshing it out and changing it or mutating it into something else. And for this first example, it actually came from Dream Theater. I first learned this chord from working on Dream Theater's song Hell's Kitchen from Falling into Infinity, and I heard this. And in that song, you hear that chord and tonality, appear, strummed. And I heard that, and I was like, what is that? It sounds like you're floating in Frank Zappa, Steve Vai, universe or something right there. And that's an E add sharp 11 right there. Definitely Steve Vai, Lydian approved. And if you look at it, if you think of like coloring chords, just think of like a Johnny Cash, cowboy E major right there. Right? Think of that E major, but we're going to flip it upside down. So instead of this G sharp, we're going to flip that over here and make it an A sharp. And that's your sharp 11 right there. So an E add sharp 11. And I caught that from Hell's Kitchen by Dream Theater, and I was like, man, that's cool. Now, after I learned that chord, I distinctly remember doing this. I was sitting in my room, and I was just kind of playing with it. And I was listening, like I was listening in my head. Like, do I hear anything? Do I hear it going up or down or picking or strumming, or what do I want to do with that chord? And I distinctly remember I played that chord. And then I started hearing this melody in my head. And the melody was... I thought, okay, how can I incorporate that melody with, you know, part of this chord, or at least that tonality? And I came up with this. It's real stretchy, but here's the chord riff and that melody together. Kind of strumming through it with part of that E there. And to kind of strum it like that, I had to do away with the top, you know, open strings just to kind of make it, you know, make sense. So I did away with that, and I just kept this. Right? And then right there, that's like part of E major, right? And then I did it again. I stopped and I listened, and I was listening to that chord, like the last chord of that cycle. And then I was like, do I hear another melody or anything there? Should it go up or down, or what should it do? And then just kind of seemingly from nowhere, I heard another melody. Okay, how can I incorporate that melody and make it kind of, you know, a similar strummed chord kind of part? And I came up with... And I also remember adding those open strings. I was like, okay, I couldn't use the open strings for that first riff, but maybe I could do it right there, and I figured out a way to do it like that. Right there, the final chord of that riff is that E5. So now I had an A part and a B part, and I thought, what can I do to make it go back to that first section, or the A section? So then I did it again. I stopped and I listened, and I was like, okay, there's my last chord. Right? And then I listened in my head, and what I heard following that was... heard like a bass part, right? And I was like, okay. And I was like, hey, that works. And then that takes you right back to the first part. The three parts put together, the A section, B section, and C section. And then when I did that, I mean, of course, that took like an hour or two to kind of sit there and tap into myself and figure out what I was going to do. But all of that stemmed from just hearing, you know, that Dream Theater song, Hell's Kitchen, and I heard that E add a sharp 11, and I was like, ooh, what's that? And then sitting there in my room and just really like whittling and kind of shaping or whatever, the next thing I knew, I had that song. And that song's actually called 12. That's from my first album that I put together back in 2004. I did write that song a few years before that, but I did create like kind of a glorified demo that's on my album Vertigo, and that was completely homemade. All my albums are homemade. You can find that on Bandcamp, and then certain albums I've released and made over the years, I did give like the distribution push. You can find a lot of my music on YouTube and Spotify and iTunes and stuff like that. But Vertigo is actually only available on Bandcamp, and that's 12. Okay, next up, actually, this was a similar time period, and this song actually became a song called Four, which is also on my album Vertigo. And by the way, the song titles on that album are the track numbers. So, track 1 is called 1, track 2 is called 2. This is 4. And I remember sitting in my room once again with the cowboy, Johnny Cash chord. And I thought, man, I really liked adding this, that A sharp that I found in that Dream Theater song. So I was like, well, what happens if I start moving some of the other notes around? So then I was looking at this E, and then I moved that up to an F sharp like that. And here I am coloring chords, right? And that's an E major add 9 right there, just E add 9. Right? Kind of an extra dreamy, major chord right there, right? An E add 9 or E major add 9. Now, I did a very similar thing. I remember I was sitting in my room playing with that chord and just listening in my head. Like, what do I hear? Am I picking it? Am I strumming it? Does it go down? Does it go up? What is my kind of creative intuition telling me? And I heard it moving up, and I heard part of the chord remain, and then part of the chord kind of move up higher, and I came up with this. And I was like, oh, okay, I really like that. And that's kind of what my head heard. I was like, okay, this to that. Right? So that's an E major add 9. And then this is kind of a goofball chord. So that would be like an E flat 6/9 sus4 implied. Because there's your flat 6, there's your add 9, and there's your sus4. So a E flat 6/9 sus4. But what a cool, colorization of that chord moving here. Like that, those little breakthroughs when you hear something in your head and you grab your guitar and try to find it. When you do find it, it's like Christmas. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And then when you can't find it, then that's like Groundhog's Day or something, where it's like, man, this sucks, and I can't find the next part. Which, no offense to Groundhog's Day, sorry groundhogs, but you know what I mean. Like, Groundhog's Day is nothing like Christmas. So when you can't find it, it's frustrating, But don't throw your guitar against the wall. Just keep trying. If at first you don't succeed, remember, try again. Okay, next up, this actually happened right after that. It might have been like a month or two after I wrote 12 and 4 and I started recording, those songs for my album or whatever. But I distinctly remember doing this. And this is probably, very similar to what you should do. When you find something you like, grab it and analyze it, play with it and mutate it and twist it around and, turn it inside out. But never forget like what the original spark was. Like, okay, no matter what you do to the chord, you could mutate it into a completely different key and whatever, but never forget like where that came from. Like, okay, I'm gonna log that in my brain, but I'm gonna mutate it and change it into something else. And with this, I remember I was so impressed with this E add 9 I'd found. And then I really liked that change, that E, E flat 6/9 sus4. And then I thought, well, let me see how many other chords I can kind of discover, just kind of shifting and moving around. And this kind of goes back to those tips I shared earlier. When you're being creative and writing and kind of being playful with music like this and coloring chords, don't worry about what it is. Don't define anything. Don't sit there with a music theory book and your protractor and everything and a calculator trying to figure out what you're doing. Don't do that, because you're going to kill whatever the idea is. As soon as you pull a book or something out or an app on your phone or whatever, it's like, no, you're killing your creativity. So don't worry about that stuff. Write the music first. Come up with the part first. Like make those connections and find that inspiration. And then later, you can sit there and analyze it and define it. And, oh, that's a mode from this, and it's, I got a flat 9, and it's in the key of G or whatever, you know what I mean? Don't worry about that stuff while you're writing it. Worry about it later. And that's what I did with this. Like, I started here, and I moved into that E, and of course I just told you not to worry, and here I am defining it, but that E flat 6/9 sus4. But trust me, when I learned that chord, or when I discovered it, I didn't care what it was called. I just cared about finding it, where I was like, yeah. And then I just started moving. Then I moved into this. And that just kind of stemmed from this. And then I just continued to kind of shift things up a little bit right there. And then that led me to this. And then that led me to this. And then again. And then that led me right here. And when I finally hit that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's really cool. And that's technically an E major 7 right there like that. A really, really tasty one, but that's just E major 7, you know, played in a very unusual way. And that's kind of almost like a scale, because you're hearing that G sharp ascend all the way up to that E right there. So it does kind of sound like a harmonized scale, even though it's technically not. But it's just like this smorgasbord or buffet of really colorful chords right there, right there, right here, right here, here, there, and then finally, that little booger. And that really impressed me, where I thought, you know, I had no idea what I was doing. Of course, later I defined those chords, and I'm not going to sit here and define them right now, because I just want you to play with this stuff. And yeah, they're real stretchy, but I like stretchy chords and those kind of unusual tonalities and stuff that come with them. But that's the little, like, kind of mutant chord scale right there. And I really dig that last chord. That's real super dreamy and really unusual too. Okay, the last example I'm going to share here, this actually became a song called Redeem, and this is from my album Carbon, which came out 10 years ago in 2015. What? I can't believe it's been 10 years. But very similar thing, even though this was years and years later after I'd released and recorded Vertigo. But I do remember doing this when I wrote this riff and this song. And that's what I wanted to share, you know, some in this lesson, as far as what I was thinking or what I was doing when I came up with some of these ideas. And this one I was playing with this, right? That's just really a glorified E sus2 like that. You could also think of that like an add 9, but technically it's not an add 9 unless there's a third, like E major, add 9, E minor, add 9. And without the third, it's just sus2, right? But it's a big 6-string version because you got all those open strings and stuff too. But I remember I was sitting there with that chord and I was like, okay, I want to do something with that. And then this is kind of a different approach. I didn't hear a melody, I just heard a changing bass note. So instead of like something, you know, in the upper voicing or in the middle of the chord, I was hearing changes on the bottom, right? So I distinctly remember listening in my head and I heard that. And then I heard something change. And then I heard that note that I added change again. So I heard this. And that's kind of all I heard there. But I did hear everything kind of going down from that point. Listening, and then I eventually hit this, and then I heard that kind of mutate to this, and then I heard that little kind of cadence like the sus4 going back to the major third there, and I was like, okay, I like that. And then if you listen to Redeem, it sounds like playing with that chord and listening to my head, like what do I hear in my ear? And like I said, I was hearing those like bass notes change. And then I heard, you know, it going lower and the chords changing like I was saying. And that's just another example of, you know, sitting there with your guitar just being open-minded and creative, you know what I mean, and not dictating anything, not trying to define anything, just playing around, right? Just stirring things up and like, hey, what happens if I move here and what happens if I do this? And then like I said, later you can sit there and analyze it and be a nerd about it. Like, okay, I'm playing the, you know, the ninth, or I'm playing this, or this came from this key or this scale or whatever. But when you're writing and being creative, don't worry about that. Like, literally play with your guitar and music like a kindergartner with finger paints or something. Just go crazy. And then later you can say, yeah, that's a tree and a bird, you know, but while you're doing it, don't worry about it. Just go for it. Just go nuts. All right, that's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with this look at coloring chords. And I actually had the title of this video set aside for a different idea. So hopefully I didn't disappoint anyone. Maybe you were expecting something completely different than this. But I decided to use that title because that's literally what I was doing when I wrote these songs and came up with these parts and ideas. I was sitting there with chords and kind of coloring or playing with them and mutating them. And then the next thing I knew, I was stumbling on these melodies that I heard, or these, you know, chords that I kind of shifted into and stuff. And it was like, oh, wait, I've never heard that or played that or seen that before. And that's really what excites me. It has for a very long time. As much as I love tackling and working and learning somebody else's music, I really enjoy pushing myself. Like, what can I do? What can I pull out of me? Like, yeah, it's cool to learn a Jimmy Page riff or a Van Halen lick or a, you know, an Yngwie solo or whatever. But more often than not, you know, it's like, I almost feel like I'm like trying to mimic somebody, almost like an impersonator or something. And I'm not Eddie Van Halen or Steve Vai or Eric Johnson or whoever. You know, I do remember seeing somebody critique me or they criticize me in the Frank Zappa soloing secrets. And they were like, hey, you don't sound anything like Frank Zappa. And like in that particular video, it's like, yeah, I'm not Frank Zappa, but I was sharing Frank Zappa's concepts and some of his ideas, right? I wasn't trying to like be Frank Zappa. And, you know, I basically sat here and said that I love Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck's my favorite guitarist of all time. And although there are Jeff Beck licks and songs and some things I can do that sound like him, I'm not talking about mimicking him or being like Jeff Beck Mach 2 or something. It's like, no, I just respected the hell out of him while he was alive. I still respect the hell out of him now that he's gone. But that's a respect thing. That's not a, I'm going to play and sound exactly like him kind of thing. I'm not interested in that. I don't want to be anybody else. I want to be myself. But I can be influenced by other people. And that's what I think everybody should do as a musician. Don't copy people, but you can definitely beg, borrow, and steal ideas from everybody that you like. And that's the way I've kind of steered myself as a musician since I was a teenager. So anyway, hopefully you got something from this. Please leave some feedback and comments and subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.